which is Auckland Council, our top risk register. And if I can ask Shivali Kukreja and Cecilia C. to come to the table. If Shivali, are you on your lonesome today? Or is
Cecilia is the...
Oh, Cecilia, come to the table as well. We'll have both of your bright faces in front of us today. So if I can, I'll formally move the resolution, which is simply a noting resolution that we note the top risk register and the heat map contained in attachment A and B. Do I have a seconder for that resolution? Yep, Councillor Filipaina. And Shivali, I think you're going to introduce the item for us. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm presenting the Council's top risk report, which was considered by the Audit and Risk Committee on the 26th of February. The Audit and Risk Committee has referred this report to the governing body as a standing...
Shivali, can you just please move your mic or move closer to the mic or your mic closer to you? Thank you.
So this item is a standing agenda item. So what you have in front of you are the top 11 operational and strategic risks, which were identified at the executive leadership level. And these could have an impact on Council achieving its objectives if the risks were not managed well. The top risk register was reviewed and it was updated earlier this month. No new risks have been identified, and we continue to work with the business units to undertake deep dives so that we can assess the design and effectiveness of the controls, and also to identify if there are any further mitigations required to continually manage the risks. The results of the deep dives are discussed and reported to the executive leadership team as well as to the Audit and Risk Committee. I'm happy to take your questions now.
Thank you, Shivali. So we'll start with questions and then move to the second section for comments. And I've recognised Councillor Desley Simpson, and then Councillor Linda Cooper and Councillor Chris Darby.
Thank you, Your Worship. Could you please explain to me or confirm that the list of risk themes, has that got, is that the same risk themes we've had as a continuous process, or are we actually doing something to get rid of some of those, or is this, we're just noting it's here and it's here again and it's here again the next time and it's here again the next time. So can you just give me some confidence, hopefully, that the risks actually that we do have are being addressed and the list is getting shorter, not longer, or staying constant? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Through your chair, so the risks we have in our risk register are the potential risks that Council may face in a future time. These are not necessarily going to be removed from the risk register, but on an ongoing basis, we continue to manage and monitor them. Our goal is to significantly reduce the risk as much as possible through having controls and mitigations. And the way we do it is we assess it through the deep dive review process, whereby we look at saying, okay, are the controls working as they're expected to? Do we have sufficient controls? And also to see if there are any further mitigations required. I would also like to add that when we undertook our annual risk review exercise a year ago, there were approximately 29 risks on the Council's top risk register, which was considered to be too many to be managed at that high level. So we have reviewed that risk register and we have come up with this high level top 11 risks, which are then cascaded down to the business units who also continually manage it and see how those risks are applicable to their area.
Follow up if I may, and you can send me an email. I'd kind of like to know the risks that you've taken off. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you. Just in terms of your controls, the existing and additional controls suggested, where, in terms of those, where does it show we're actually on track with all of those actions? Is it further in? Is it, yeah, because up front? Yeah.
Thank you. That is, through you, Chair, that is actually a really good question. And we are, as we work with the business units to identify the new controls required. We actually are tracking them and having regular discussions with them to ensure they are meeting the due dates or progressing well with the controls. These are getting reported at the Audit and Risk Committee on a quarterly basis. The 2 deep dives that we completed were on the asset deep dive and the cybersecurity risk, and there were some controls and further work required to continue to mitigate the risk. And the business and the departments who are owning those risks and controls are actually on track on trying to implement them. But I'm happy to give an update next time. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chris Darby.
Just the wording in your report, because the attachment B doesn't really support this wording, but at paragraph 8, you actually acknowledge climate change readiness and response as being something we need to address in the medium to long term, when all the evidence is that it's actually with us now and we need to take action now. So it's probably just the way you've worded paragraph 8, which I don't think reflects attachment B, where you delve more deeply into climate change readiness and response. So it's in the future, I would prefer the narrative in the report to more accurately reflect what you've actually written more precisely in attachment B, because it's if the reader reads just paragraph A, they'll say, oh, that's second tier stuff, that's medium to long term, and we know it's not that. Do you want to just comment about how you arrived at writing paragraph 8 and reconciling that with attachment B, which is to the contrary?
Through you, Chair. Thank you for your question, and I will make sure that next time it is better aligned to the risk register. In terms of the paragraph 8, so we do acknowledge that it is a risk that currently Council has to work on and understand the mitigations and the response plan to, and we have already started work. But what I meant by the medium to long term is the actions that we will put in place to address the readiness and the response plan would be medium to long term, because we are currently in the short term assessing our current state. So this is where I came from, but I've got on board your point and I will reflect that in the paragraph.
Thank you. I think just to remove in future reports that ambiguity, I think we're all aware that this is the action is needed in the short term and the risk is already with us, and I think Councillor Darby's point is well made. Councillor Josephine Butley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Hi, good morning. I'm just wanting to make sure that we've got, all the risks identified. And I noticed in terms of cybersecurity that in our value for money ICT review, it's mentioned in there that one of the risks for cybersecurity is availability of appropriately qualified staff, but that's not identified in our risk register. So I'm just wondering, has that risk already been addressed, or is it not?
Thank you for your question. Through you, Chair. So if I was just to correct myself, to recap your question, is that the availability and capability of staff to address the risk of cybersecurity, and if that's captured within our risk register, is that the question you had?
It was in this ICT review, it says that one of the risks is availability of appropriately qualified staff. So but that's not identified in the risk register?
Okay. So resources is definitely a continuing issue, and while it is not shown in our causes or to the driver for this risk, it would generally be reflected in that column on that register which says the risk drivers and potential causes. So we will address it there and manage it through that way as to what we are doing. So once we've got it identified, we then say, okay, we are working through what are we working through to try and address our capability in staffing resource risk.
More question, please,
Yep.
Mr.
Councillor Bartley?
This is a really dumb question, but you know, when we're dealing with cybersecurity, is it wise to put down the risks and how we're trying to deal with them? Because isn't that putting it out there to hackers how they can infiltrate us even more?
Through you, Chair. That is actually a great question. And so generally the controls around the cybersecurity risk are quite standard in many organizations. What we haven't done here is actually set how the control actually operates, but behind a system and to control and to protect our security, the technical terms that we may have used is not necessarily giving away how we actually manage or protect our security at the back end. So we were very careful in trying not to put that in this register, but we have detailed discussions with business units, with the department to understand that they do have those controls. But I would say that what's documented here is not going to tell someone that how do we actually manage that at the background.
Good question. Councillor Kathy Casey.
This is a high-level report, but I've got a low-level question. And the next item in the agenda deals with dogs and our dog policy and bylaw. And one of our most at-risk business units is animal management. And I wondered if you could say a few things about the kind of preparation that we've given our animal management staff to alleviate the risks of both mental and physical harm.
Yeah.
Going to ask Ollie here to talk about the health, safety and
Ollie,
wellbeing.
yeah, this comes within your area, I think. If
This
you'd like to
does,
comment
yeah.
on it.
So yeah, Councillor, this does come under the health and safety sort of broad risk. So one of the things that we've identified, as you all are aware, through the violence that we have been experiencing at the organisation, was that there was a bit of a gap in terms of the training that people were receiving. So we have gone through an entire process of reviewing all that training. So as a basis, everyone who now deals with the public, be that in a library, animal management, our leisure centre staff, they're all expected to go through conflict resolution, de-escalation training, so they can understand how to extract themselves from the situations. That's also been balanced out with the need, particularly in animal management, to understand that their role is very different, because unlike libraries and leisure centre staff who are almost receiving staff, they're going into those sort of situations as part of their role. So there is extra training that they have based on that, and that's delivered at the unit sort of manager level. One of the things that ELT has been very strong on as we've been doing this is to ensure that obviously the unit managers do take that approach to a good approach towards induction, ensuring that people are going through that stage of preparation fully. As they join the business, they get their training, they go through their induction, and they're only released onto the streets once they've done that entire process. And that's something that the unit managers are certainly working through on a day-to-day basis.
Supplementary, do we use body cameras, and which business units avail themselves of them?
We do. So currently the only department using body cameras are the animal management team. They have been using body cameras now for about 8 to 9 months with some success.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Penny Holtz.
Thank you. And Councillor Darby and I are very much on the same track. The concern that I have is that I'm presuming our risk register and our risk team drive the risk comments in our reports that come to us, and if so, we may be undercooking the climate change risk as it appears then in our variety of reports that come to us as council. So my question on that is, have I got it right that the risk statements are driven by our risk team, or are the risk statements in our general reports written by the report writer with a bit of reference to this list of risks?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. The process that we undertake in arriving at producing a risk report, both from a top-down and a bottom-up approach. What this means is that we talk to the senior management and the key subject matter experts who are dealing with the issue of its assets, in the case of climate change, the relevant departments. We also work through, so that's kind of from top-down approach, and what we also do is work through the actual departments themselves and the people who are at operational level. And in arriving at the what's in the risk register is a combination of both, so we take both perspectives.
Mr. Mayor, my question is just in our, so thinking about the reports that come to planning or environmental management or finance, we have a risk statement in each report. My concern is that if there isn't a strong reference back to our risk register and our risk team, we run the risk of not adequately making a balanced decision. But also, by the same terms, if we haven't necessarily identified with great clarity the risk of something like climate change, and our risk register is driving the risk statements in our individual reports, we risk making some very unwise decisions. So what am I asking for in that is just that we more closely connect the two processes, and we up the level of risk acknowledged in the climate change area, because it is one of the most costly issues that we are heading into phase.
I think if I can just add to that, I mean, we've got the risk register here. We don't want it to be in a silo. We want it to infiltrate every issue that we are debating that may be associated with it. So perhaps you could explain how you ensure that the work you're doing on the risk register actually carries across to the specific papers we deal with in the individual committees of the whole.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, what we're doing is we are, in the last few months, we have commenced the process of linking through the report writing process with what's in our risk framework. So what it means is that staff authors who are writing their reports will have to make reference to the kinds of questions that we would be asking them in considering some of the impacts, for example, in the courses, and the impacts of some of the options as part of the analysis. So that is something that we have recently commenced on. And by doing so, we are asking authors to think really carefully about what it means from an organization, but from a wider perspective as well. So this is also part of the training and the workshopping that we've been undertaking with a number of the groups that do report writing as part of the Quality Advice Program.
Okay, thank you. You're happy with that, Councillor? Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, but one of the risks that are you looking at with the stormwater? I see here you've got the stormwater and waste systems management is a risk. One of the things that I know is quite concerning for a lot of members of the public is the risk of flooding. And over the years, this has been a really big thing that I've been harping on since about 2002, back in Manukau. We have areas that have been known to be flood zones, and since the unitary plan, Councillor Quacks and I really did try to make sure that everybody understood that, because we know our area, we knew that there were parts of Howaka and Pakuranga, the older parts, where most of the properties are just not even connected to stormwater, and yet we've allowed all this infill housing to go ahead. Is there a risk, especially with insurance later on, because I know that in Australia and other parts of the world, that with the type of issues that we're now facing with flooding, last year we had 3 extreme weather events, and some of the properties that I visited were properties that I'd visited in 2000, 2002, and I knew those areas really, really well, and that's why, some parts of the unitary plan, I'm really pleased that it's going to be looked at again, because there are some parts of the unitary plan that really do need to be looked at. But this infill housing that's going into areas that we know have got serious flooding issues, is this going to be a really big risk to the Auckland Council as far as insurance etc. So that's one question. And
So I'll just take them one at a time if I can,
One at a
Councillor,
time,
if we have an answer to the first question now.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. That is a very good question, and it's something that we're grappling with at the moment. So, yes, the impact of storm events is quite significant, as you're aware, and it's something that we are taking into consideration, certainly in relation to insurance as well. There's a complex matrix of issues that come into play, and you've mentioned one of them, which is the unitary plan, the impact of that. There's also legal considerations in terms of the provisions under the Building Act that the Council, from a regulatory perspective, is required to comply with in issuing building consents. And of course, there, in terms of the stormwater network systems, there are multiple issues as well, whether it's urban or rural, etc. So we are, as part of the work that we are proposing to undertake going forward, the stormwater asset and the impact of climate change is definitely one that we are looking to join up. So what is the impact of climate change in terms of our own assets, and also generally more in terms of liability? It is quite a complex area and quite a broad area as well. So what we're looking to do is take this in chunks to, first of all, consider the issue, and then take it through and report that through to the Audit and Risk Committee, and we will bring that back to this committee as part of the regular reporting.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, your second question?
yes, well, thank you for that, and I'm really pleased to hear that this is something that you are taking quite seriously. Okay, the second question is I've just on the theft and fraud and corruption. So, are there any departments of council or CCOs of council that you have major concerns with? Are there any departments that seem to be, if you're able to answer that question?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the integrity team would probably be in a better position to answer your question. And I'm just looking behind, and I cannot find any of the members here to do so. So is that something that we can take back and come back to the committee on?
Thank you. If you can come back directly to Councillor Stewart, I think that will help.
Just one other question. I see this is on the attachment A, page 19. The speak up channels from our charter. What exactly is that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as part of the development of our charter, we are encouraging all of our staff to speak up in situations, for example, where they feel that they are either being bullied, or that they have observed something that they feel is inappropriate, or that they feel that there's an integrity issue. So the Speak Up channel is a key component of the Charter, and it enables staff to effectively put your hand up and feel comfortable and safe in reporting an issue, and in being able to feel assured that their issue is being treated in confidence, and that action is being taken to respond to their issue. So that's essentially what the Speak Up channel. The council provides multiple avenues to enable staff to speak up, depending on how comfortable staff feels about using any one of those avenues. So there are a number of options available to staff.
Just further to that, just what about elected members? Have they got a speak up channel that they can go to as well, where they're treated the same way? Thanks.
Yeah, so through you, Chair, some elected members have used our anonymous and the named integrity line to raise concerns. One has occurred quite recently, which we're currently investigating.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wayne Walker.
I'm assuming we can make comments as well as questions.
Sorry, could you say?
I'm assuming we can make comments as well as questions.
This is question time at the moment. Just if you could confine it to questions,
so
please.
Just got a question then. I'll put my hand up for a comment. I'm assuming this risk register applies across the Auckland Council family, so it applies to AT, Watercare, RFA and so on?
Through you, Chair, this particular top risk register is for Auckland Council. And for the CCOs, they provide quarterly risk reporting and risk update to the Audit and Risk Committee. And on a quarterly basis and on a rolling basis, one of the CCOs come and verbally present their risk update as well.
Okay, so I understand that. So I guess I just want to put on the record my concern around an integrated approach, particularly as it goes to climate change.
Thank you, Councillor. You've got another question?
Sure, got another question as far as risk. And it goes to climate change. Risk is a function of magnitude times probability. In respect of climate change, the magnitude is of such a high order that the impacts are considerable. So in respect of risks around climate change, are you factoring in a very high order risk that I would suggest across many issues is actually a certainty rather than a risk as things are progressing? So how are you rating that risk? How are you elevating it?
Through you, Chair. So at this moment, we are working through identifying all the climate-related risks and assessing them and really understanding the factors that are prevalent in the different risk types. So as we progress through that journey and towards the mid or towards the later half of this year, we will be coming back to the governing body and presenting the outcomes of our review of the assessment of the issue currently that Council is facing so that we can plan ahead and work through the actions.
My last comment goes to risk and approach. Are you taking a scenario-based approach, given that we've got levels of uncertainty and given that the information that we might rely on from the International Panel on Climate Change is already some years out of date as compared to the real risk that we face right now?
That is definitely going to be one of the things we will be assessing. The scenarios will be looked at along with all the other types of risks, including assessments of scenario-based risk assessment.
Thank you. Last question, Councillor Darby. Can you put the mic on, please, Councillor?
Getting used to the tech. I referred to attachment B. I meant actually the second part of attachment A. But attachment B itself, it really can't stand, and I'm consistent with my colleague, Councillor Hulse here, it really cannot stand when it identifies climate change readiness and response as a moderate overall rating. And that has a likelihood that it is possible, and the consequence is moderate. That is just not accurate. So that as it applies to climate change, that attachment cannot stand. In my view, Mr. Mayor, it has to be withdrawn. Unless you can explain why the likelihood of climate change is possible, contrary to evidence, and the consequences are going to be moderate. Because that's where the 3 sits, in the middle, in the amber.
Councillor, I'm with you on that. If you look at para 9, that's what the deep dive process is about. And I would be incredibly surprised if as a result of that process, we did not lift that from moderate to high or extreme. But sorry, I should have left the answer to you, Shivali.
Through your chair, thank you. And that is exactly the purpose of that paragraph 9 and the deep dive, is to really assess and have our risk rating informed. So by still having a moderate risk rating, it does not mean that we are not working on managing that quite actively and working with stakeholders across council to have a collective view and thought process into managing this risk going forward. But definitely taken on board your comments about the risk rating. But as we were in the process of this, it didn't get updated. I think this was also raised at the last time because we're still working through. But when we come on next time, you would see a change in that rating, which will be informed through a proper assessment.
So just a quick one, because it is important. This is a public document. It's signalling what we do in our work here at Council. And Councillor Hulse and Councillor Walker and I have been pretty consistent on this. So at the moment, the public see a document that says climate change is at this level. When all our analysis says it's at this level. So I would suggest that we say that openly that this is an irrelevant document in itself at the moment. And look, I guess it raises the question about the other priorities there as well.
Not quite sure how you're going to answer that question. I think we've just had an assurance, Councillor, and I share your view entirely. We've had an assurance from our officers that this is in the process of change and that the risk level will be adjusted. I don't want to look back on why it wasn't that way in the first instance, but it's very clear to me from what we've been told today and the paper in front of us that that change will occur and needs to occur, which is your point, and I endorse it. Thank you very much. We now have an opportunity for comment. I think you indicated, Councillor Walker, that you wanted to make some comment on this.
Yeah. So, I've got a particular concern, and like Councillor Darby and Councillor Hulse, I'm homing in on 8, where it says that one of the key risks facing council in the medium to long term. And my concern is there's two elements of risk. There's risk attached to the event, and I would suggest in this instance that risk is of such a high order of magnitude that it is incredibly significant in terms of the cost, not only to council but communities, especially around inundation. But then we've got the risk of the decision, and I want to home in on that because that is immediate, it's short term. And there are any number of decisions that we are making right now, processes that we are engaged with around the location of stadiums, the consideration of stadiums in areas that are going to be inundated, the sale of marina land by Panuku, water care projects that are entirely unsustainable, no carbon accounting across this organisation. I'll repeat that, no carbon accounting. So one of the basic frameworks for assessing risk, at least as it goes to mitigation, is not part of our decision making. It should be. And I can give you examples, certainly on Watercare's part, where they are investing many, many millions of dollars in projects that are entirely unsustainable. So my concern, and I'm addressing this to the Chief Executive, is on a decision by decision basis. Right now, we are committing ourselves for a future into decades that is locking us into a path that is going to generate significant emissions and place significant numbers of people, many, many thousands, in areas that are being inundated. And there are many areas of Auckland that we know are going to be inundated because inundation is simply a function of time. It is no longer if, it is simply when. And against that background, there's the work that the Insurance Council and insurance companies are doing, and banks in this area, that is going to be escalating this risk to a very tangible risk as far as the marketplace is concerned. So that also is an element of risk that we need to address, and we should have reporting on sooner rather than later. So I come back to point 8. Those comments should be struck. because this is a document that informs Auckland around our position, and I am entirely uncomfortable with those words. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've probably got a bit of a more of a moderate view on this, because I think that we do actually have a process to assess risk, and we work through all of our risks in the same way. And so I think 8 actually, and the answers from the officers, does actually give me an assurance it is being worked on, it is being taken seriously. And we can rush to knee-jerk change something, wipe it out with 2 or 3 people saying so. But I mean, unless you put the whole thing to a vote, you know, we can't just be changing it on a few people's views, just like you just can't change it on my one view. And so I do think I'll be seriously looking at our next meeting around this to see this. I think it's really important, but I want it to be well informed by all the experts in our own organisation who are risk managers, who do have that expertise against a criteria. And also, we can ask those other questions of Watercare and the other CCOs at our quarterly meeting, so I hope they come up. But for me, I'm very reassured that we are having this work, and you can't just do this work to order sometimes. You have to really do the deep dive, and I don't want this once over lightly. So I support what we've got at the moment with the explanations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Al-Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. And look, I support the direction that we're heading. Number 7, and you've outlined it, I actually put my hand up to ask a question. The question was going to be around how do the committees in regards to the relevant risks come into play. There is work being done around climate change at Penny's committee, at our committee. It's work being done. I'm looking forward to the deep dive, but also, Your Worship, I'm also looking forward, as you pointed out and our staff pointed out, how it then connects with the relevant committees. So I'm happy. It's a summary that's outlining what the situation is in regards to 7, 8 and 9. It's only a summary. So I'm looking forward to the deep dive, because I have no doubt at all that, as you pointed out, Your Worship, that the moderate will definitely change in regards to the work that's getting done. So I support the recommendation, but especially the deep dives, because the work has to be done. But please do not forget that there are committees that need to be advised of anything that you find through the deep dives that will be relevant depending on the risk. So, Your Worship, definitely support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I hear what people have been saying, and I don't think there's actually any disagreement around the room, but it might assist. I'm proposing to move an amendment, which I'm going to ask Councillor Hulse to second if she's comfortable with it. The B would read, endorse plans to review climate change risk with urgency and report back in the next quarterly risk report. I think that bridges the concern that has been expressed by some councillors and the view that, yes, this is in train anyway, but let's make it explicit. So are you happy with that, Councillor Hulse? Would you like to speak to it?
I think Councillor Filipaina was your seconder.
Oh,
I think
okay.
him and I joined at the hip on all these issues. I think he'll be happy to simply include that in the recommendation.
Yeah, thank you, because I think with the standing orders would just be part of the recommendation, so we don't need an amendment. But Your Worship, again, providing that any work in regards to what B is comes back to the committee, the relevant committee. I mean, it'll come back to us quarterly, but if there are things identified during that deep dive, that needs to come straight back to committee before the quarterly risk report. So I'm happy to be included in regards to the recommendation, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll put the motion as amended with the amendment moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Filipaina. So I'll put the whole A and B. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, not. Let me just finish the vote, Councillor. Those opposed, no? No. I declare it carried, and Councillor Walker, you would like your vote recorded against the resolution. Okay, thank you. That will be duly recorded. Thank you very much, team. That was a longer session probably than I anticipated, but a lot of interest and a lot of pertinent questions. We come now to